All right, tell me if this sounds familiar. You wake up in the morning, but you can't find the willpower to get out of bed until the last possible minute. Or you're driving back from work just feeling so drained from the day with barely enough energy to think about doing anything else. Maybe life feels like it's passing you by, and there's this underlying sense of helplessness and dissatisfaction, but you're just way too exhausted to even think or do anything about it. For years, I thought I'd finally get to a point where I could be so stoked to tackle the day. Just jump out of bed because I had finally discovered my life's purpose and I loved what I did. Instead, what I did figure out in the last 8 years of working was how to really maximize my weekends, and at the same time battle feeling super overwhelmed and drained every single Monday morning. Believe me, living for the weekends is not the right way to go. I was sad, frustrated, and bottling up stress I didn't even know I had. And even as I made my career jumps from consulting analyst to operations manager to a product manager at a big tech company, the happiness I thought my job would finally give me never really came. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm beyond grateful for the opportunities that I've had, but some part of me knew, or maybe already believed, that the life I imagined for myself just wasn't going to be found working a 9 to 5. And having that thought is actually really, really scary. As someone raised in an immigrant household, I was constantly told that if you were to finally find a stable job, you hold on to it for as long as you can because you've achieved the dream. And it's easy to understand what your family might mean because anyone can actually see just how scary it is when you're forced to choose between a very clear path with perks and benefits versus a dark, unknown void where you don't even know where your next paycheck's going to come from. But despite all this, I finally decided to do it and quit my 9 to 5 job with no backup plan. This wasn't an overnight decision, and it was actually only after months and months of really hard thinking, battling my own anxiety and self-doubt, that I was finally able to get enough courage to do it. I never really told anyone how I was able to get to that point, but I'll let you in on a little secret. I was actually able to make that decision after learning a few really important lessons. And today I'll share with you what those lessons are, because chances are, if you're watching this, you might be thinking through the exact same things that I did back then. And hopefully by hearing how I was able to make my decision, it might help you decide what's right for you too. So it's been about 5 months since I left my job as a product manager at Microsoft. And since I've left, I've made a lot of really awesome changes in my life. But actually leading up to that moment when I had to actually sit down and talk to my manager, it was really, really tough. These kinds of decisions don't just happen overnight. And it's pretty easy to see how it could actually all go so wrong. There's a quote that says, "The right decisions are always the hardest to make, but they must be made to live the life you deserve." It took me a long time, but while I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next in my life, I was able to learn a few really important lessons that ultimately helped me make the decision to leave. So the first lesson I learned is that you have to do different things to get different results. I'm not actually sure where I first heard this. It might have come from Albert Einstein's quote about how insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. It's funny because it's actually pretty easy to understand, but hard to do. It's just like how I've changed companies and roles multiple times in the last 8 years, expecting to feel more fulfilled every single time. And it finally clicked for me after experiencing what it was like working at a tech job, because as much as I hate to admit it, that same feeling of emptiness I had as a consultant working 70 plus hours a week was pretty much the same level of emptiness I felt working as a product manager with free lunch and on-site gym and all these other great benefits. Look, I totally get it that at the end of the day, a better work-life balance and all these great perks are really awesome. And I definitely don't think there's anything wrong with it. But for me personally, it was this realization that I would rather be working on my own dream than working on someone else's that made me realize it was probably time to stop trying the 9 to 5 and do something different. Because after all, if I just kept going and found another job on a different team or even in a different company, then why would I expect to feel any different than I did before I quit? Maybe right now you're even thinking of making a change, and it doesn't have to be a big one, but just being able to do something different might be that change that leads to something really new and exciting. Which brings me to my next point and the next lesson I learned. The 9 to 5 life is actually a great life. Yes, the office politics are there and you always have a boss to answer to, but for the most part, everything is stable and predictable, like your paycheck, your working hours, even the type of work that you do. And it wasn't actually until accepting that the 9 to 5 life is a great life that I realized that it just wasn't for me. Because as much time as I spent focusing on all the negatives, there are a lot of positives to this lifestyle. And by seeing all the great aspects of having a stable, solid corporate job, it actually helped me realize what truly mattered to me and what I was really giving up to pursue a life outside the 9 to 5. Remember, the right decisions are always the hardest to make. Understanding if starting your own business is is a very personal journey. And hopefully it's obvious now that there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a great 9-to-5 job, as long as that decision is yours and yours alone, and not what anybody else or even society tells you is right for you. All right, so the third thing I learned that gave me the confidence to finally quit my job is understanding that entrepreneurship, like most other things, is a skill. And a skill is something you can learn and get better at over time, which I know sounds a little obvious at first, but when you're thinking about the fact that you have no idea where to get started, or that you're going to waste a lot of time and money because you don't have the experience yet to figure it out, it's so easy to talk yourself out of doing it because there's so many ways you could fail. But another quote I think about a lot is, perfect is the enemy of good, because that's all you really need to know that something can be done. All you have to know is that you have it in you to do a good job. And if you fail, you've learned something, and maybe you'll do a good job next time. I know a lot of people might not have changed jobs as often as I had, but it's actually the experience of working as a consulting analyst and then an operations manager and then a product manager with having no experience each time that made me realize that it was possible to learn how to be good at anything, even if you're really bad at first. And trust me, I wasn't great at any of these jobs when I first started, and I'm definitely not anyone special. But what I did know is that eventually I'd figure it out. And sometimes knowing that is enough, which actually ties in pretty well with the last lesson I learned, which is that the best time to get started is now. So I get that this one is probably the toughest pill to swallow, but I think it's also the most important. Since if you also believe that entrepreneurship is a skill, then it's also true that the only way to get better at it is to just do it. I actually used to think that being a product manager would help me be a really good entrepreneur. And that was actually a huge reason why I wanted to switch into that career. But now, 5 months after I've quit my job and started working on my own business, it's pretty obvious I was wrong. And yes, this was a lesson I actually learned after making the decision to quit, but I still think it's really important to share because there's really no substitute for the experience of just getting started and working through all the unique challenges of being a business owner. Good news is that even though it sounds tough, the reality is that it's pretty satisfying to learn and grow and see yourself improving day by day. The last few months, I've been able to figure out how to overcome challenges and problems and learn about things that I never would have if I had just stayed in my previous job. It's honestly been so rewarding and pretty fun. And I'm not saying there's not some really tough times, but I truly believe it's never too late to get started. Because fact is, the earlier you start, the more time you actually have to learn and grow. And I know some of you watching this might be thinking, oh, if I was going to be an entrepreneur, I should have done it a long time ago. It's too late for me now. It's interesting because there's this notion that, if you were going to become a super successful entrepreneur, you should have gotten started way earlier when you were young, just maybe in your 20s or something, maybe even earlier. But based on a study, it turns out the average age of a successful startup founder is actually 45. I don't know about you, but after I learned this, it felt like there was so much less pressure to be perfect. And it really did make it a lot easier to know that even if I fail now, I'll get it right eventually. And yeah, those are the really important things I learned that actually helped guide me towards making that really tough decision to quit my job and leave. And don't get me wrong, it's still really scary that I don't have a backup plan, but I was able to spend a lot of time planning before I left, trying to figure out how I was going to exit and what I was going to do in the months right after. And while I don't have everything figured out, just making that decision to leave was the best decision I've ever made. If you are curious about how I was able to plan my exit and, the details of everything that was going through my mind at the time, consider subscribing to stay up to date on all the videos I have coming out soon. I really hope this channel can just provide another perspective on what it's really like to transition out of the 9-to-5 life. I'm also planning on giving fully transparent, raw, honest thoughts on things that I've learned, am currently learning, and all the challenges I face as I am going through this entrepreneurship journey. So thanks for sticking till the end, and let me know down in the comments below what kinds of videos you'd be interested in seeing. By the way, I'm Chris. Appreciate y'all and see you soon.